I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by the co-directors of Bobi Wine, The People's President. We are joined today by the wonderful Moses Bwayo and Christopher Sharp. And I wanted to start by talking about the journey of what you kind of initially anticipated this film to be against what it's ended up being, because when you initially connected with Bobi Wine, it sounds like the initial interest and spark was like music career, and then it became very much about the political activism which follows. And so I was just really interested in the journey of meeting him, having the idea for one type of film, and then that journey of it becoming something quite different and really prolific.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I'll start with that one. Thanks for having us. It's really
Of
good to be here.
course.
So, I grew up in Uganda. I was born in Uganda, and my dad was also born in Uganda. So, we had this big connection. I was a big fan of Bobi Wine's music before I met him. We used to play his music in the car, and when we had parties, we loved Bobi Wine. I actually met him in Europe in 2017. He was with Barbie. And I sat down, and because we had this Ugandan connection, we sort of, had quite a lot of common. And Barbie had grown up in the same area of Uganda as I had. So we just started talking, and he explained what he was embarking on, this extraordinary journey where he'd been such a successful musician. He'd pulled himself out of the ghetto, set himself up, an amazing wife, beautiful children, concerts all the time. And now he was just plunging himself into this terrible, perilous position. And you just knew that he was dealing with a military dictatorship. And it was just going to be, it was not going to end well. It was very, very likely not to end well. So I was just struck by his bravery, and it just felt to me like a film script. So I went out to Uganda and met Moses and spoke to Bobi, and Bobi said, yeah, by all means, follow me. And the whole thing about making this sort of film is you don't know where it's going to go. You don't know if you're going to end up with a film. We didn't know, what would happen to Bobi. Many times during the filming of this, we thought Bobi had been killed or he was going to be permanently locked up. So it's just really perilous. The whole process was, I mean, it's really difficult. But you sort of carry on and you carry on and you carry on, and eventually, our whole point was to be able to tell the story of Uganda, and I mean Moses will be able to talk about that well.
Yeah, hey Mara, thank you again for having us. It's really great to be here and to share the story of our film. Yeah, like Christopher says, we're both born and raised in Uganda. So Chris reached out around it was 2017, tried towards the end of the year. And Bobi had just won an election as an MP in his constituency, which he won by about 75%. Uganda is a very young country with over 85% of the population under the age of 35. And we had, as a young man living in Uganda at the time, we had really seen Bobi, as they say in America, pull himself up by the bootstraps, go from being living in the ghetto to becoming a musician, and building a wonderful life around himself. So we had seen him transform and become this inspiration to the nation, and we loved his music. And yeah, now he was coming into parliament and saying, look, I'm not only going to speak about the ills of this government. I want to enact laws that are going to change, that are going to bring change. So Christopher reached out around the same time. We met, and Chris was like, Moses, I was born here. My dad was born here. I'm like, what, really? And he's like, yeah, I want to make a film about this country. So, it was just a deep connection that we continue to share today. So we, it was a very easy ask. I quickly said yes, and we embarked on this wonderful 5-year long, now 6 years long journey of making Bobi Wine the people's president. Yeah,
I love that, and because Christopher, you were bringing up that point about obviously during filming, you knew that there was a lot of risk involved for Bobby personally, and that there was a possibility that you could lose him along the way. And I was really interested in if you had conversations about it, because he obviously is very self-aware of it. We see him in the film saying the most important thing for me is to still be alive 7 days from now for the election. And so he's aware that that is a potential thing with the number of threats on his life that are happening. And I was just interested if you had any conversations with him or yourselves about what would feel important to make sure that we capture and that we tell in his story in this film, if that does happen.
Yeah, I mean, the feeling was, I mean, someone asked me the other day, so what was the thing that struck you most during the period of making this film? The thing that struck me most was their bravery. I mean, I just, you just cannot imagine willfully putting yourself in that situation, knowing that the upside is so likely and so difficult. So it's just the courage. I mean, maybe it's the youthfulness, but it's just he just doesn't seem to equate risk. But it's not like he doesn't talk about it. So Bobby will constantly be saying, I might not make it, but everyone must carry on. He almost expected to to not pull through. And it's just, I mean, just so courageous, and so many people around him. I think the other thing that's happened to Bobby, because Uganda is a relatively undeveloped country, and the actual money and influence just rests with so few people, the weight of a nation was on his shoulders, and he felt that burden. He felt, and he actually says in the film, I had the loudest voice, and so it fell to me to stand up for these people. And without Bobby, the most of the people, 90% of the people of Uganda have no one looking after them. So the healthcare is terrible, the education system is terrible. And here is a man who actually made it. He made it, and then he is willing to go back and lose it to help the nation. So it was just, I mean, they are absolutely astounding. And I think Bobby's constantly aware that tomorrow might be his last day. I don't think for 1 minute he's unaware of that. And Barbie as well. I mean, Barbie, you see in the film, Barbie crying. She says, I don't know, if only I knew what had happened to him, if only I knew, then I could deal with it. And she's constantly in those positions, she's all the time she's thinking something terrible is going to happen to him, but they're not like mere mortals. They're very, very special people, and they've surrounded themselves with other special, courageous people.
Yeah, and I think the film does a really beautiful job at looking at, the strength that they find within themselves, but it also looks at the fallibility, and, it doesn't shy away from, it's a terrifying thing. There's fear involved at certain moments as well, and persevering in that sort of realm. And I was interested particularly in just kind of filming with the family in a lot of those moments, like when they're sitting around the table talking to their kids about, we're going to send you to America to stay with a relative so that you're safe, or even just the intimacy of, seeing Bobby and Barbie's relationship and how they really kind of pull each other through a lot of situations, and how that really gave a lot of heart and a lot of other layers to the film for you both.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful, really experience. And look, Bobby and Barbie gave us this incredible access, which grew over time. And speaking on the point of danger that Christopher was making, when we started early on, we were really focusing on the political stuff and the political movement, but increasingly the state, after Bobby announced that he was he was making efforts to remove the dictatorship in power. There started the state, with its whole state apparatus started coming at him with violence, increasingly on his family, those close to him. There was a grenade thrown close, at his son's bedroom one morning, so we were then really welcomed into more into their home and their family. So this access actually grew over time as the danger around them grew. In fact, by the end of it all, the camera was almost like a protection to them. And after 5 years of following them, we were like family, and some of these intimate moments, just happened as we went along. Like that specific scene that you describe, his election aides had been arrested. Like lots of his friends around him were arrested, and it was just him, his wife, his children, and just a few other people around him. There was not so many, his driver and a few other people. And he noticed that it was, as we were heading into the election, it was going to be worse. There was already a big military and police deployment around their house. So yeah, and they've created this wonderful like communication between them and their children. Their children know exactly what they're doing. The children know their dad is not a bad person. He's not in jail because he's a bad person. It's because he's actually fighting for the rights of the oppressed in Uganda. So yeah, that scene, just happened, just happened in front of us, and that was a tender, wonderful, beautiful moment. And yeah, we had over 4,000 hours of footage. And there's incredible moments like that, very intimate and beautiful that we captured.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just to add to that, it's just a moment, it's a thing of trust. So you start off, with people who a lot of the stuff we filmed would have been extremely useful for the regime. And it would have put Bobby and Barbie, obviously, and they excluded us from nothing. But I always say that if you gave the 4,000 hours to someone who wanted to make a derogatory film about Bobby and Barbie, they would struggle. They really would. It's just very much, it's just how they are, that's how they are. And I think because they knew that they were telling the truth and they weren't putting on an act, it was fine for them because they're the real deal, and they could just, they could just allow us that access knowing they would be all right. To the extent when, they didn't have any editorial say on the actual film. We obviously showed it to them pretty close to the end because we wanted to make sure one in the film who was going to be compromised or something which would be damaging to anyone, who didn't want to be seen or something like that. But there was no, Bobby's first thing when he saw the film was, why have you taken out all the violence? Which just gives you an indication of how much violence they had suffered. And obviously there is quite a lot of violence in the film, and we thought it alluded perfectly. People imagine, this is just a slice of it, but it was just this incredible thing of trust, and that's the people they are. They are, when you go to their house, there's always people around, there's people in the garden. They are just very welcoming and great people. And they also, Bobby said to us the other day, he said, we had to make a decision very early when the children were very small to be very honest with them, because they were going to school. And as Moses just said, people would say, oh, your dad's in prison, he's a criminal. So we thought the best thing was to, the way of protecting them was to pull them in early and explain, this country, this is the situation. Not everyone understands it. This is what we're trying to change. And it worked. The children bought into it, and then they could be at school and be outside and have the confidence to know that their father and mother were on the right side of history.
And I feel like in the film as well, alongside moments like that, where you have the intimacy of the family, you've also really tackled the much broader context, going even further than just the political landscape of Uganda, but also how is Western media potentially complicit in Western countries and the way that they're covering it, particularly with news. And I was just interested in kind of how you approach tackling the idea of a film where you have these very intimate portrayals of your subject and his family, but then also making sure that you had these much broader conversations and questions that you want to ask the audience.
Yeah, you get to the end of the election where, there's been no Americans or Europeans there to monitor the elections. It's a total sham. And it's presented in the media as a result. Museveni won by 54%, like it's a sort of factual thing. And then the other thing which was depressing was the way, Europe and the Americans and the British government come out and say, deeply disturbing, we're troubling violence, troubling this, and the integrity of the election, is questionable. But within weeks, everyone's back to doing business with Museveni. And the real hero, the person who actually stands for our values, our democratic values, the person who's done the whole thing by the book, non-violently, stuck to the rules, is very much sidelined again. So, but Bobby doesn't feel like that. He's picks himself up and he goes again. But in Bobby and Barbie, Africa, not just Uganda, Africa have the most incredible heroes. And I personally think Bobby's the most interesting politician to come out of Africa since Mandela. He's really someone very special.
Yeah, he's really remarkable. And I also was very interested in kind of the process once you got much further into shooting, and the two of you weren't necessarily kind of side by side, where you had Moses, you were kind of on the front lines with Bobby filming and doing a lot of the cinematography with him, while Christopher, you kind of started going into the edit room and looking at those 4,000 hours of footage and going, what is the narrative arc of this film? How are we going to shape this into a story that works for audiences? And I was just very interested in what that stage of production looked like for you both.
No, it
Yeah,
was wonderful.
yeah.
I mean, it was such a great collaboration. I don't think we would have done it any other way or in any other better way because, it was increasingly dangerous in Uganda, even just to have the footage, right? We had to like smuggle footage to Christopher every now and then. And, by the time we started editing, we had amassed, I don't even know how much. There was so much footage and we just needed to cut it to something. And, there had been all these attempted assassinations and Bobby, his driver, had been killed. We wanted to have something ready if anything happened. So we started editing quite early on and, so we wouldn't have done this any other way. I think the whole arrangement worked out perfectly and, it's just been an incredible collaborative journey. I was on the phone all the time with Chris and I remember we would talk at every hour. I called Chris and he picked up and right away he would just pick up whichever time. And I remember meeting his wife and his wife telling me, Moses, you're my co-wife. Like I'm sharing Chris with you. So like I call him at these odd hours, this is happening. Look, I've been arrested. Blah, 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 this is going on. What do we do? How this scene is happening anyway. So we would, discuss and it's been a wonderful collaborative effort. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing is, we started editing quite early on. So it was sort of a year of looking at footage and then 2 years in the edit suite. I mean, when you watch the film, it feels quite obvious, but when you're confronted with 4,000 hours of footage and so many good stories and so many people who deservedly should be in the story. But, we had an amazing editor, Paul Carlin. What we sort of worked out was that the closer we stayed to Bobby and Barbie in the narrative, the better the film was. And, rather than broaden it to a lot of other people around him who are also incredible, it just felt good when you were close to them because you felt the pain of Uganda through their pain. And then, we had to because we wanted the film to be under 2 hours. So we didn't want to have so much violence because we wanted people to be able to watch the film without being kind of totally engulfed in horror, because I think sometimes it can be a distraction from the story. And then we also, did things like, there was the vote rigging, we had video of policemen with black bags stuffing votes into ballots. We had people just sitting on the floor and clicking Museveni's name on the ballot thing again and again and again. So we had all that, but we just thought it was implied, and we just felt that people. I remember one reviewer said to us, we should have given us a history of Uganda. And we sort of had these conversations, but if people want to know the history of Uganda, look on Wikipedia. Ours was an observational documentary, and it was a slice of Bobby and Barbie's life then. You could equally be making a film about them now, and it would be a different slice of their life, because the situation and what they're going through is continual. So it was, and it was just that working out that this is a film, it's a love story. It's a film about Bobby and Barbie and their children and what they're trying to do and what they're going through. And once we'd got that established, and then the other thing that was really important was the music, because Bobby communicates with the people of Uganda through his music. We were just talking about the coronavirus song. That was very topical at the time. If he wants to tell the policeman and the military who are attacking him, if you want to say, listen, I'm with you, you're one of us, you're also oppressed, you're paid terribly, your families are treated badly, you are with us, he'll sing a song, and then he'll put that song out, and that's his way. So it made complete sense to have Bobby's music in the film and also have the lyrics as part of the narrative story. So it's sort of, but it takes ages to work out. It takes so long to work out these things. And when you've done them, it's like, oh my God, that's so obvious. But it does take time. So it took a couple of years to actually sit there and craft a story.
And I also think to the point about how much of the history of Uganda do we show and need to educate the audience on versus not for an observational documentary, the same can also be said of Museveni. We don't necessarily need the play-by-play of everything over 35 years. And I think you've made really smart choices in the way that you kind of give us that information at the beginning, and then we really just see through the way that things play out. We have such an understanding of what that looks like in day to day, especially for Bobby. And so how did you set about kind of landing on that as, if we're showing him and if we're talking about him, this is how we want to feature that in the film alongside Bobby?
Yeah,
I mean, yeah.
Sorry, Moses. Go, Moses.
Yeah,
Go.
Museveni is he's a repressive dictator, and just any statements he says, you can just tell who he is. And very brilliantly, Lindsay Hillsam does this interview. We had been debating about how much we bring into like the Museveni people, like, his advisors and all that, we were quite unsure of how that would work. But close to the election, we had thought about this interview of Museveni, and we thought, how shall we get access? I tried to reach out to some of his press people. They turned us down, but, of course, I think it would have been a terrible mistake, if we had interviewed him, because I don't know if we would leave that, state house with that footage. I have no idea. But yeah, just brilliantly, Lindsay Hillsam does this wonderful interview where she just leads him through these traps, and he just gives us everything that we would have needed in an interview. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, there was sort of bits which, you're filming. So in DC with Bobby in the car, and it's in the film, and Barbie's just gone back, and Bobby's feeling really down. So he's kind of, because Barbie's just gone back, and he's just sort of, thinking about her going back. And he says that thing about, I'd really like to, Museveni was my hero. I'd like to have a frank conversation with him. You said the problem with Africa is leaders who stay too long. What happened to you? Now, for me, that 30 seconds just says everything. You don't need a history of Museveni. You have Bobby saying in the shortest time, we respected you, you were a great guy, you said all the things, and 38 years you're still there. And that's it. You've learned everything you need to know about Museveni in that. that little 30 seconds delivered by Bobby.
Yeah, and you both also were touching upon earlier, obviously the population of Uganda is very young, with 85% of the people being under 35. And I think the film also does a really beautiful job at kind of capturing that sense of the groundswell of support and change that the younger generation want. And so how did you set about, when you were filming, making sure that you were capturing those moments to show, you know, the way that the generations behind Bobby are also kind of coming up with that same ethos and approach?
I think it was very natural, Bobby, I mean, again, with his music, he has this wonderful support all over the country. And this cuts across age, but mostly the young people, the young people really resonate with his messaging. As a young Ugandan, I was not political at all. Well, I knew what was happening. I knew what was wrong. But, it was a waste of time. Elections were such a waste of time. You just waste your whole day or 2 days, because sometimes you have to show up the night before the election to make sure you're in line to cast your vote, right? But, so young people were just not participating. But here came a young man, whom we knew very well. He had, we had seen him in the media transform into this wonderful politician, and he was telling us that, look, it's possible. If we join hands, if we all show up and protect our vote, we could change things. And for the first time, so historically, the Ugandan election, usually only 6% of the population votes. Only 6% of 45 million shows up to vote. But for the first time, after Bobby was, sending out this wonderful message of everyone needs to become a voter, not just a supporter, but a voter. Let's not just talk about these issues. Let's participate. There was a new the Electoral Commission reported that in the first time in the history of our country, 10%, like a total of 10% of the population registered to become voters. Now, that is just clearly showing you that, look, this message is resonating with the whole country. 10% of new voters of the whole 45 million people have registered to vote. Those are Bobby's voters, right? So, and a lot of them were young people. So this was really organic, and it was natural. It just happened before our eyes. And, it was a blessing to capture these moments and to be present to witness them. Yeah.
And Bobby and Bobby and their entire family are just so remarkable. And, I love that you've created this film, which is such a testament to who they are as people, and is giving the opportunity to introduce so many people to them as well, and on a global landscape. So congratulations on a phenomenal film. And thank you so much for talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, we really hope that the story of Uganda, the story of Bobby and Bobby really, goes far and wide. And we appreciate National Geographic and everything they're doing. They've really put us on this wonderful journey and platform. And, every level of support is really, really welcome and greatly appreciated.